Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the podcast that everyone hates. Actually, the subtitle here was, Why Do People Hate You? The other subtitle was, Should You Believe in Satanism? But we had some moral qualms about using the title, Should You Believe in Satanism? So we ended up with, Everyone Hates Us. All right. Before we get into the topics for today, I would like to point out that I am filming from my punk rock mother's household, and if you look behind me, you are going to see some crazy wallpaper. She spent a week doing this. It just only goes
wallpaper.
What'd you say?
Amazing wallpaper.
When she did it, I was like, Mom, that's kind of the craziest, like that's something like, teenage girls would not dare do.
Yeah.
What you just did, and you're 70. I was hanging out with the bishop here in Kansas City. I can't remember. I don't just hang out with him, but I was with him for some reason. He was talking about how much he loves hiking. And we asked where he goes hiking around here. And he says, actually, I keep my hiking stuff at my mom's house. And I said, Father, how old are you? And he goes, 70. How old's your mom? He's like 90. So it's okay. I'm still at my mom's house because my bishop still keeps his stuff at his mom's house.
At his mom's house. Very good.
All right. Here's the topics we have today. Did you know that there was a satanic priest who became a saint? There's also quite a few problems with Satanism, like whether or not it actually exists and to what extent it does exist. I want to talk about that. And all of that serves a greater question of, do we have intentional enemies, and what role does the supernatural play in our enemies? And this is an idea of do we just have people who have misplaced good, or do we have people actually out to get us? How do we get here? Why does this surprise us if these enemies exist? What's the right strategy? Defense, offense, withdraw, or just siege. And we have a really, really late review by Laura Hehman of the Obama movie. And then I'm going to make a compelling case why you definitely want to work hard for kids to have the right to vote. And I'm not kidding.
Okay, then. I just learned about a blessed Bartolo Longo from Italy that I didn't know about before. And he was alive in the mid-1800s, got caught up in a lot of anti-church fervor, eventually turned to the occult, to the point of becoming a satanic priest. And he grew so unwell in mind and body during that time that a Dominican priest was able to convince him to come back to the faith. And he becomes a third order Dominican. And during this time, he is very bothered by the idea that if you're a priest, if you're a Catholic priest, you're a priest forever. But he's consecrated himself as a priest to a demon. So how can he go to heaven? And he remembers that the Virgin Mary said that anyone who spreads the rosaries of the mystery will go to heaven. So he devotes his life to this. And even realizes that there is a gap in the mysteries, Jesus' public life and ministry, and comes up with the idea for the luminous mysteries. And his writing is where John Paul II got the luminous mysteries from.
Wow. I just thought John Paul II had made it up until he found this saint.
I always actually thought that was kind of a funny thing about John Paul II. That he just thought he could improve upon the rosary.
I also like this saint because he kind of clarifies a problem that we've talked about on the podcast before, which is that him being a satanic priest who becomes a saint also helps clarify another problem we've talked about on the podcast, which we talked about this time in the 80s and early 90s where there was this satanic panic, and the same way that progressives at certain levels need there to be Nazis to justify their anti-racism campaign. And not that there aren't, it's just they kind of need more than there actually are,
Right.
They need more enemies, the better. There was this idea that kind of in evangelical Protestant world that real Satanism would be great because it kind of creates a nice foil,
Well, yeah, and it creates an enemy, and it's an out because then you don't have to focus on yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because you're an external enemy. And the thing that was so weird about the Satanic Panic is there were all these like kind of like urban myths being passed around about how many thousands of kids were being sacrificed in Satanism. And even the police would kind of like buy these things, but it would be like, you just looked at the number of missing children, the total number sacrificed would be larger than the number of missing children in that state, you know?
Right.
So it'd be like, there's something clearly not squaring up about this theory and there's no evidence, but there's this like broad belief in it, you know?
Yeah.
And
the historical 80s Satanic Panic is well
documented.
No, it's in the last season of Stranger Things. This is like the whole sort of overarching thing that is like moving a lot of the people's actions in the last season. Yeah.
Huh. And you also brought up that I think you and I independently brought up that like when people actually organized churches of Satan and incorporated them as nonprofits, and you listen to these people get interviewed, you're like, this does not sound like Satanism. It sounds like you're just trying to, upset people.
Yeah, it's they're trolls. Yeah, it's not. Like as the kind of Temple of Satan, Satanic Temple or whatever. Like those people that are trying to go into all the schools right now. It's like metaphors. It's ironic. It's not. They claim it's not like real belief.
And ultimately, like a real Satanism that squares with Christianity just doesn't make sense. I'm going to end up arguing it does make sense. But like at some level, theologically, it's so weird. It's like, okay, so here's God. Here's Satan, who depends on his very existence to God. Satan always loses. God has always won. Satan always treats you bad. God always treats you good. God has like, it's not like they're even close in power level. One's infinitely more powerful than the other. It just doesn't make any sense in that cosmology that there would be Satanism, right?
There are some people that are just ready to burn it down and burn themselves, and those are like school shooters and people in gangs, and like that doesn't make sense either,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah,
the desire to... All right, and that's where we're going to have to get into, like, there's something here that maybe is not Satanism in this, like, simple way that the 80s thought, but maybe it's, like, Satanism adjacent, But before we go there, let's talk about these ironic people for a second, because there was a thing around 2014 that, to me, was more a thought experiment than a real problem, but it was, like, on Harvard, they wanted to do a black mass, right, at Harvard. And by the end of it and all the outrage and blah, 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 what ended up happening was they ended up having a black mass that did not use the Eucharist, because at first they wanted to do that. It was not on campus because they wanted it to be there. So it was in a Chinese food restaurant next to Harvard. There was a black mass with 50 people, right? And Harvard's response was people going to adoration and then going to mass at the exact same time as the black mass.
You mean the Catholics at Harvard?
Well, I think even the president, who maybe wasn't Catholic, did.
Wow.
I think people realized this was pretty bad, like at least PR-wise, right?
Yeah.
But as a faithful Catholic, the thing that was interesting to me was like, why do I care? Do I care so much I need to like stop it? Do I need to go kick down the doors of a Chinese food restaurant? And I think that's an interesting question. So what I think comes to mind to me when you say black mass is like desecration of the Eucharist and potential weird sacrifice of something or someone, either like violent or sexual or both. Right. So if it was a destruction of a person, like a child, I think you raid the Chinese food restaurant, right? The interesting thing is when it's the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is God, right? Mm-hmm. And my instinct is that that's very different than a child. Mm-hmm. And I kind of have some, like you could logically say, if you would go bust down the door for the child, you have to bust down the door for the Eucharist. But at the same time, they're kind of like restaging the crucifixion. And when St. Peter went to violently try to stop the crucifixion, even though it would have been kind of I don't know what you call it when it's a lost cause effort, but like when he takes his sword and chops off the ear of the servant to keep them from taking Jesus, Jesus puts the ear back on and tells him to put away the sword.
Yeah.
And there's also this issue of like, if you're a dad, like, do you want your husband?
Does God want you to?
Yeah. Do you want to go to jail trying to save the Eucharist here when your kids need you? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
My sense, though, is that it's maybe like the Old Testament or like the Indiana Jones movie, where it's like they're basically messing with the Ark of the Covenant at their own peril, and it will probably nuclearly explode on them, and I don't have to do anything. Yeah. Like I think my job, if you're messing with the Ark of the Covenant, is to run the opposite direction as fast as I can before the thing explodes. So I don't know. That's my instinct.
Yeah. That's really interesting because I think like I would never want to be near an exorcism. I don't know. Yeah.
I'd be more comfortable being with an exorcism than being around a Black Mass, because it's like the exorcism, you're attacking the demon, and in the Black Mass, you're attacking Christ. I feel like it's kind of
right.
different.
Well, right. I'm saying I would not want to be near an exorcism, and this is like
worse.
Yeah. There's something right. Something is being restored in an exorcism, But
right.
Yeah.
I think that we as one of the things I tell all the young people who come to our ministry is to really grow into your life as a Christian, you cannot just meditate on turn the other cheek and take the log out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your brother's, or you'll never correct anyone and never order anything, and you'll always give up your authority. And it'll be a disaster. I've seen it time and time again. It's just a disaster when people, that's the only interpretive key they have, right?
Yeah, that goes along. I think one of your pet peeves is when a missionary says, and they gave me so much more than I gave them. And you're like, did you give them anything?
All right. I don't see how that goes along with it, though, but I like the statement. So,
well, the idea is like if you're going out as a missionary, you're not just there to receive.
Right.
And you have to try to put something forward.
That's true.
And that's the same if you're always like thinking that you are
it's kind of negative action versus like a positive action. It's like,
right,
am I just correcting myself, or am I actually bringing Christ to people?
Yeah, and sometimes it's like you see some wrongdoing, and you might have some wrongdoing in your own heart and actions, but it's time to step up, despite, and hopefully you're trying to eradicate the wrongdoing in your own heart, as well. But
let me say this kind of like more clearly, I think. So I feel like the first stage of Christianity is take the log out of your own eye, and you'll never be completely done with that, right? It's also true you have to turn the other cheek to so many things and accept some unacceptable things, right? And it also makes sense that that's the first step. Mm-hmm. But there's a point where you have to like turn the tables on that and actually start ordering things. And if you're out of a nonprofit, you might have to fire someone, even though that doesn't feel Christian. And you have to do these things where you're actually like kind of creating the world as it should be positively, right? And there's a violence in that. And there's a violence in that sometimes we as Christians are afraid to even say is okay, right? And I think that we as a religion a little bit have gone way too far in tamping down violence to the point that we no longer know how to do it constructively, So I think that's a bigger picture here, and it's going to have to do with, like, if we do have enemies, we're going to need that little fight in us. We're going to need that dog, right? But I feel like a lot of what Christianity's been is getting rid of that dog and becoming, just peaceful people who get along,
I think when we were preparing for this podcast, we had a lot of arguments. And one thing that I had on my mind is like, well, the Beatitudes are all about like turning power on its head, and like, but there is the Beatitude, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and that is, more like positive action versus maybe meekness. Because I think a lot of the Beatitudes have to do with what you're saying, turning the other cheek and kind of taking that road. It's like being meek and mourning and, still loving God in all of this and being poor in spirit. And that there's like, that's where blessedness is, but there's also blessedness in hungering and thirsting for righteousness.
I think you're right. I kind of feel like there's even a different, like, you're doing a good job of trying to like look for a place where there's like both sides, and we have to honor both sides, like the kind of like be the poor and meek, but also be that who hungers and thirsts for righteousness, right? I feel like there's almost like a different solution to this problem, and I can't quite get my head around it totally. It's like somehow we've become cooperative in evil by being too passive, and it's not so much like, I don't know that Christians are supposed to stand up with like medieval style swords, which we always pull out when we want to be masculine. We need some broadswords in this conflict, but it's like we have a problem not giving adulation. Like when someone just wants to tell you something that's square wrong, you go, oh yeah.
Right.
Like we have a problem even just not doing that, like just silence, because the silence is an affront.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that's a violence we need to have in us. And not even have it bother us. Like, yes, I can give a front like that.
Yeah.
And not everyone has to think that I go along with these ideas, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And then way down the road is some other form, but yeah. And I think let's move on a little bit, because I think this is going to kind of get into this next level conversation, is that we're not actually worried about Satanism. We're not actually worried about becoming the Swiss guard who like, this would look so corny, but they'd like kick down the door of the Chinese restaurant, get in there with all those like ironic Satanists and shut it down. That plays unfortunately into their hands, by the way.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So the real question here is not Satanism, although that's always been an interesting question to me. The real question here is like, do we actually have intentional enemies out to ruin us? And as opposed to just like people who have different goals than us, and what role do the supernatural forces play with this? And the reason why this is kind of coming up on our podcast right now is that over the last 6 months, there's been this kind of building tension where like, I've been seeing like these are not the religious right. They're kind of like weird people like Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, just conservative commentators who are almost like on the more punk rock side of the conservative commentation or whatever. Not the Pat Robinsons of the world, What are you laughing at? These are not the George W. Bushes,
Calling them punk rock. Yeah, okay. Alternative.
Well, I mean, like Tim Pool shows up in a beanie and he's a skater.
Yeah.
But he's also runs, every time he talks, there's 200,000 listeners.
Yeah.
So
okay.
They're all like speculating openly that there's demonic warfare happening. And that even the whole UFO phenomena is just some spiritual realm phenomena that's manifesting itself. And to hear them say this, me as someone who does believe in the supernatural, and I don't know, I've never really even thought that the UFO phenomena could be spiritual realm phenomena. It's shocking to me to hear them openly say this in front of mass audiences like, hey, this is my best hypothesis.
Do you think, you would differentiate this from satanic panic? It's not like everything is wrong because of evil forces in the world, or?
Yeah. I don't think they're satanic panicking because they don't have that energy when they say it.
Like the panic part of it.
Right. I do think, though, that like if you see like a lot of stuff kind of going wrong and there seems to be some either intelligence or unity in how it's going wrong, you have to think, oh, is there a really messed up incentive structure? Are we just failing everywhere? Is that why this is happening? Is there a cabal of people behind it, orchestrating it like a conspiracy? Or is there a satanic conspiracy behind it? You know what I mean? Like, I think they're all valid, like, hypotheses. Some of them aren't ones that, but it's interesting to see people that are more or less secular in their minds throw out the hypothesis that it could be actually supernaturally evil.
Yeah, well, I think it's like the rumor that like elite in Hollywood has been, involved in satanic worship or whatever has been like a weird rumor that I've been hearing for like maybe 10 years, eight years. But to have it be, almost mainstream is interesting. I don't know. I do think people are kind of looking for spiritual understanding. I think they feel like that's missing. Like there's obviously a spiritual world out there that we're not accounting for. And I mean, I think on the other side, you have young people being really into like tarot and new agey crystal stuff and whatever, to the point that you see tarot cards and crystals at Five Below, but yeah, I don't know.
I feel like that was there in the 90s a little bit too.
Yeah,
it's always interesting
that
that wasn't Ouija like a Milton Bradley game.
I mean, Milton Bradley eventually released the Ouija board. Yeah, but yeah.
Well, let's talk about this. So the point here, though, is there's the occult, which is a broad category. There's Satanism, but I'm not so concerned about that. I think I'm concerned about stuff that is close to Satanism.
Yeah.
Satan adjacent, because that makes more sense to me as like an operating thing. And I think broadly we could call it Moloch, because that's one, that's the conservative media is using the term, but two, that's like the Old Testament god of child sacrifice, right? And when I'm thinking of this, it's like we also talked about Bukele, and he talks about the MS-13 gangs actually worshiping
which
demons.
I thought that was satanic panic, and then I looked it up, and it's not. Like, it was for real.
Like, there's real court cases where guys are being charged with sacrificing people in gangs because they believe in like a demonic worship, right? Or a Moloch type deity.
And that the beast, was demanding it of them.
Yeah, and it stood up in court. Like, it's not just satanic panic.
Right.
My sense is, though, there's also this idea that, like, I had this experience when I was very young, and this is a very soft experience compared to like what we're talking about. But like, I went to this camp, and I didn't know the kids very well at the camp. We were roasting marshmallows. First marshmallow I ever roasted in my life. I'm in 4th grade, right? And the dads at the camp, like who were like running the little cabins, were like, "Hey, this is how you will roast a marshmallow. You slowly roast it on all the sides and get it all gooey, and that's the best way to do it, right?" Well, of course, like almost every kid in the cabin lights their marshmallow on fire and blows it out. And while I'm sitting there trying to do it the right way, these kids come up to me and they go, "It tastes better if you light it on fire." And I'm thinking, man, I think I might light this thing on fire because that's kind of cool. And one of the dads is like, "No, you're doing it right. They just want you to do that because they ruined theirs." And how evil that is, this idea that people actually do that. And you should see that in yourself a little bit, where it's like, when you mess up, you kind of want everyone else to mess up too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And aid and abet them in it, going down the wrong path. And I think there's a little bit of that going on these days with this kind of like, what this is like a hatred of purity. Like, there's a hatred of the innocence of children that's not wrong to call it hatred. Like, they actually want to destroy the innocence, maybe because their own innocence was destroyed. It's hard to figure that out, right? And that this is like a real intentional enemy we have. It's weird that Moloch is in the Old Testament is that which makes you sacrifice your children. And then we've gotten to the point where we're just not having children. We're also mutilating children so they can't reproduce. Yeah. It's just, I don't know that intentionality of Moloch is how you explain that phenomena, but it does seem like a real enemy. Yeah. The thing that brought this to the head to me was that Olympics opening ceremony, when they're like reenacting the Last Supper, making a mockery of it, doing like transvestite burlesque, right? And then you have to ask, like, what is going on here, right? And it's like, are they actually oppressed by the Catholic Church? The answer to that's no, right? Is this for the audience? Like, is this for the Islamic nations? No, they hate this. Is this for... I mean, like, who is this for? And it is just a message of, we hate you. you know? And when I saw Catholics process that and say things like, do better, or that was in poor taste, I'm like, oh no, it was not in poor taste. They were very deliberate what they were trying to do here. There's no question what was going on here. They're trying to give you the message that you're done and you're cooked.
Yeah.
Like, if you want them to do better, what do you want them to do? Tell you that more effectively than they just told you that, you know?
Well, I want to say that is, it's like trying to understand that it's a foreign thing maybe for American Catholics. But I a million years ago, 20 years ago, I lived in a small town in France for like a month. And that was the first time in my life, and they were very French people in this town. That was the first time in my life where I had people openly say, like, I hate Catholics. And things like, I hate Americans almost as much as I hate Catholics. And
were you friends with them after that? As a Catholic American?
It was.
You were like, oh, no, let's have dinner. Well, I mean, like, help me understand that. Because, like, is it like they hate them and I can't hang out with you because I hate you? Or is it like, I just told you I hate them and now you were friends?
I like being friends with anyone and everyone. But it was like a thing where it was like, I hate Catholics, I hate Americans, but we think you pass, you know? And I wanted to be like, like, I am those things, but I don't know. They thought I was acceptable despite being those two things. And it was a town of 200, so I don't know. And I was going to be there for, I don't really know what to say. I think
Well, the question that's arising in me is, are they actually serious when they say these things? You know what I mean?
There was a beautiful monastery in the town that had turned into a writer's retreat that was no longer Catholic. There was a church that was supposedly in repair that supposedly had mass once a month, that there had been no mass there for ages, and scaffolding that was covered in dust, not like drywall dust or it wasn't like work dust. It was like dust was in there. And then there were all these beautiful chapels, and this was like in the mountains, and like the little mountain walls and buildings that had like Buddha statues.
They converted them, yeah.
Well, it wasn't even like converting, because you could tell it wasn't like a serious.
We don't really believe in Buddha. We're just putting.
Yeah, they just kind of thought that was a little bit, you know,
a way to get the Catholics a little bit.
Funny.
So it's kind of like maybe you got along well in the town, but if a Catholic persecution arose, they'd be like, "Here's Laura. You can have her. She's an American."
Well,
Catholic.
they were always trying to. There was a few people in specific that they were always trying to figure out why I was okay.
Oh, really? Okay, that sounds serious. That sounds
like they
serious.
would be like, oh, maybe it's because she's Puerto Rican. Like this, like conversations, open conversations. Like maybe she's not that bad because she's Puerto Rican. Maybe she's not that bad.
So I want to say two things. Like this plays into our conversation because these people basically told you they're your enemy.
Yeah.
And you had to get along with them, which is great, you know?
Yeah.
But the other thing why it's interesting is I've often thought that's the way you cure racism and things. Is you need someone to cross that barrier where it's like, I hate all this race, but you're okay.
Like that
and
guy.
That's the little hole in the dam, you know.
You know, there's that guy that goes around talking to like Klan members one by one, and that is awesome. He's like a black guy that he's like, well, let's talk, and then they're like, well, you're not so bad, you know. But yeah. I mean, I don't know. The main point of my story was never in my life had I had anybody with conviction openly say, I hate Catholics. Right. And to my face.
With conviction,
no
I think is important.
Yeah.
That's what I'm understanding now. Yeah.
So
at some level, I believe that like there's going to be part of our audience who is going to be surprised at people's surprise. But like,
right.
There's a certain sense in which this level of animosity and this betrayal or this enemy class is surprising to us as American Catholics, right? And like, why is that? Like, let's try to understand that. And I think it's because we have cooperated with like do-gooders of the world for a very long time.
Yeah.
You know, and the Catholic Church has built alliances with like a certain liberal type that also wants something for the poor, that also wants the good, like the same goods that we want, right? And they're our allies. And many times we didn't see a lot of distinction between us and them. Almost like when you're reading the introduction to a papal encyclical and it says this is addressed to all men and women of goodwill. Like they were that, right? But there's always been this facet in this kind of secular do-gooderism that's really off and is kind of an enemy to us, And I think that segment has actually risen to the top right now, and it's shocking.
I think to bring it back to the Beatitudes is like, blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness. I always thought, like, I didn't really totally, back to the sort of 90s mentality that we've talked about. Like, what is that, And maybe it doesn't apply so much to our political situation in the U.S. And maybe it's more like righteousness in my conduct and personal life, but anyway.
One of the things that struck me maybe about 6 years ago, I felt permission to say this out loud. I'd been haunted by this idea for many years, but I never felt like I could really take the stand like I really believed it. But the majority of the people, and I say it's a majority, and that's sad, that are actively promoting stuff for the poor hate the rich. They don't love the poor. It's as much about hurting rich people as it is about helping poor people. And that sounds crazy. And it took me forever to just like admit to myself that's what I'm seeing. But like they care much more about what the 1%'s doing and how to get that to redistribute than they care about loving and the thriving of the actual poor. And I think we're going to always these people are going to always end up being our enemies if that's their attitude, because like we want the poor to thrive and the 1% to thrive. We want the Palestinians and the Israelis to thrive, and so anyway, I think to this 90s Catholic, this is all shocking. And in a sense, we're being like at Simple House, we're in training right now, by the way. It's going great. 2 weeks training, great new crew. DC, Casey, visit our houses. You'll see all new missionaries this year. But one of the things we train is do not be surprised by Satan. Like if you walk in and someone confesses you saying they've done, or you see something bad, don't let that shake you. Don't be surprised by Satan. You're giving him even more power when you let yourself fall apart because it's just so bad, But I think we're a little bit surprised by Satan here.
Yeah.
About how open the enemies are. And then the question comes, okay, if that's the case, do I boycott? Do I run away and move? Do I fight? And these are all kind of like positive actions to kind of like fight an evil that I feel like most of us are not ready to even discern. Like we haven't been given a great discernment tool set on like how to engage like this. Like I think we need our men to be men on this issue, and we're not ready to be men because that's not the spiritual formation we got, And so you got these guys who are almost too crazy violent, who we've all met.
Like I think it's like, do we retreat? Do we fight? And I feel like I know people that I'm like, wait, you need help staying. You need help, dealing with it. And so I think like when is another thing we talked about is like, when is the trigger point,
Right. And that's all the discernment. Like, and I think that I think this is a masculinity problem, frankly. Like, I think it's like, we all know how to define toxic masculinity. We don't know how to define healthy masculinity. It's much easier to worry about one than worry about the other. Right. And I think that like in the days of like watching Westerns all the time, you were seeing all these different interesting like masculine heroes that frankly carried guns and shot people, and that can't be completely the right formation, but they were questioning it all the time. Was this justified? Was this not justified? Was this blah? And I feel like we've just gone the other route where we just want it to be we want our men to be very docile, and that's what the holiness looks like, and that's not right. Just factually, it's just not right, But the question of how do we respond to the people trying to destroy purity? Do we just like don't let them touch our kids, like keep our kids away from them in different schools? And like Like, I worry about letting my kids watch too much Disney because I just see that they just have I don't think their head's on right. And I think I don't think they're being good to kids. So I don't actually know that I can even weed out what they're doing wrong. I just don't even want exposure to it at some point.
I'm blanking on the name of that comedian. I think he's like Italian and Arabic, but lives in England, where he's like, I don't understand what Disney's doing. They're paying for the employees to like have abortions out of state. Like, they're killing their future clientele.
Right. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Anyway.
During Simboss training, I do this thing where I say, you're going to take 30 minutes and you're going to take all your worst traits and imagine what this year is going to be like if you let all your worst traits get the best of you, right? And write what will happen to you and how it'll work if all the worst traits get the best of you over the next year, right? And one of the things I'm curious about, because I never read these essays, I tell them it's private, you can destroy it when you're done, whatever, I don't want to read it. And then we do the opposite. We say, now if you do what you should do this year, write an essay about where you'll be in a year if you do what you're supposed to do, right? And one of the questions I have for them, actually, I've never asked this, but I want to ask this. I want to go, so how many of you were smoking crack and prostituting yourselves by the end of the year? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you know that you're capable of that?
You didn't really imagine it. You didn't really imagine it. Yeah.
Because I think one of the first things you get when you start taking your spiritual life seriously is you actually are kind of shocked what you yourself are capable of doing wrong, right? And so when we imagine what the world's like outside of us, whether or not it's like Satan running things, a cabal of people, including Bill Gates and Epstein's or whatever running things, or if it's just bad incentives and incompetence, don't underrate incompetence. Like, people can just become pretty bad on their own.
Right.
Without having a cabal engineer them.
Yes. And I think related, we've kind of talked about like a thing that maybe you probably don't need to spend a lot of time trying to discern this in your spiritual life, but like there is like temptation from the devil, and then there's just also yourself, and right now I'm on this Brother Lawrence kick, and one of a line is that he about the miseries and the sins of the world, far from wondering at them, he was surprised that there were not more, considering the malice sinners are capable of. And yeah, I don't know.
He's telling us don't be surprised by all this.
Yeah, don't be surprised by Satan.
But I think this does require like it's one thing to say, okay, I'm not surprised, and okay, I've said a few prayers. It's another thing to start restructuring your retirement investments because you think there's real enemies out there. And I think we're at the point where we have to start thinking in terms of real life action, not just consciousness of the problem. The first step is discussing the problem, but if you end at discussing can become an out for action. Yeah. And if this is real, then we need to take action. Let's go though. That I know you did some research on the Illuminati that's trying to control everything. Can we have a really, really late review of the Obama movie?
So I was having a hard time figuring out this movie, and in the middle of me watching this movie, Ryan comes in, he's like, oh, you're watching the Obama movie? And I was like, wait, what? And I guess they were producers. They did not write the script, but or at least Barack Obama commented on the script and the characters and their motivations. And I think they might have... I think they've financially supported a number of movies at this point. He's like a big movie guy.
Can I ask... How did Ryan walk in on a scene and in 10 seconds by watching a scene be like, this must be the Obama movie? Has he seen it or what's going on?
No, he didn't watch it. I don't know. There might have been an obvious. I mean, it's Ethan Hawke and Julia Roberts are in it.
But it wasn't obvious to you. You were like, what the heck is this? Why is this movie so strange?
Well, I couldn't. The strange thing was I couldn't figure out politically where the movie was going. And apparently it was based on a book that was written in 2020. There's there's a huge just attack that's bringing down the demise of society, basically, I guess. And then the movie was made in 2023. And here are a couple interesting things I want to bring up about it. Spoilers. Here come some spoilers. But almost at the beginning of the movie, the first like attack that you see is that there is this like oil tanker. You see this oil tanker. The family's at the beach and there's an oil tanker and they're like, oh, cool, it's an oil tanker. It's pointed straight at the beach, which is weird. I feel like if you go to the beach, you would notice that that is weird right away. But nobody on the beach notices. And in a little while later, the weird little sister is like, that oil tanker's getting closer. And everyone's like, oh, cool, look at it. And then the oil tanker is almost on the beach and the whole family is napping and the mom is like, honey, what's wrong? And she's like, it's even closer now. And it's like seconds away from killing everyone on the beach. And people are just staring at this oil tanker and saying, it's going to stop, right? Like, so the people have so much faith in like everything to be okay that even that they're watching like an oil tanker that's about to destroy them and they're just like staring at it. And then at the last second, everyone runs out of the way, you know, and narrowly escapes death. So I thought that was an interesting commentary. And then the second thing that was interesting about it was that what happens is that there's been a cyber attack on the navigation system goes out. And when people asked if this is what could have happened on the Key Bridge, it was like, no way. This was obviously not a terrorist attack.
But Obama just made a movie.
But
about
Obama just made a movie where literally the same thing happens. And so I was like, yes.
Which is fine. I mean, it's like, is it a terrorist attack? Who knows? But like, you can't ask a question.
Yes.
Even though Obama just asked the question. You know?
The movie is depressing because the people that made the movie hate all the characters and there's no one that you like in the movie. And then it's depressing also at the level that, you know this like mental game that people like to do, like, okay, if everything hits the fan, like, who are my people, you know? Right. But it's like these horrible people are stuck together being horrible to each other and you're watching this and it's like, ugh.
That sounds like reality though, but like, does that mean it's kind of a based movie? Like that's actually just like the Obama showed that everybody be horrible to each other?
The opening scene of the movie, the Julia Roberts character is like, you know, I was looking out the window and I just was like admiring the tenacity of all these people like going to work and the verve and everything and like how amazing people are, you know, and I felt so blessed to like be a part of this thing. And then I remembered I effing hate people. And that was like the movie. That's like the opening kind of scene of the movie is like she's like amazed by humanity and then she remembers that humanity sucks and she doesn't like people.
Is it kind of like a transhumanist thing? Like they're actually anti-people?
Well, it wasn't anti-people specifically, except that they hate all the people in the movie. Whoever made this movie hates the people in the movie. And apparently the book wasn't quite so much like that.
Time out though. I've been struggling with what you're saying because like the people who made the movie hate the people in the movie. What's that even mean?
I say that about
the characters in the movie hate each other, or you're saying that the producer made the characters so bad because he hates these characters?
Yes, I mean that the producer hates the characters or the people because when you don't want someone to win in the movie, when you don't see their good side, even though they're an evil person, where you don't see that spark or anything that makes them special or whatever, I think the person that made this movie hates these characters. And it will be like, if you watch a movie where there's like an evil person that doesn't even have the slightest thing redeeming and then a character that's like so great and everything's supposed to be perfect, like that movie will be unbalanced and not good, right? So you want like even the evil person for you to understand their motivations and like, you know, like you want the person that makes these characters to like appreciate them at some level, even if one of them is supposed to be. And in this movie, you're just like, all these people can die. Like, it's like you're just like, oh, I don't know.
They might as well be zombies. Like, we can just kill all these characters.
Yeah, like there's not, so that's what I think. But this movie also brings up some advice I have for non-tinfoil hat wearers. You can't tell people with conspiracy theories that conspiracy theories are stupid and don't talk about them and expect that to settle the debate, because the more you just try to stamp it out, the more it seems like the drunk girl saying she's not drunk, and so I thought that was like a, with the Key Bridge thing, Ryan was like, I wasn't really suspicious that this was a terrorist attack, but when they said you weren't allowed to ask if it was a terrorist attack, he's like, was this a terrorist attack? And the movie has, one of the characters in the movie is a tall, thin, well-spoken, very cultured black man who most seems like Obama in his very cool and collected, attitude through the whole movie. And so this character says in the movie, like, the idea that there's some evil men secretly running the world is far too lazy an explanation for everything that's going on. and I'm like, okay, this is not you. So
is that what's the explanation?
Like, are you telling me the explanation? Anyway, I don't know. It was an interesting movie. People, yeah.
We're kind of getting to this interesting point where, like, all the different ways of like shutting someone up, like calling them racist or sexist or a conspiracy theorist, have become more and more hollow to the point that you can't shut anyone up anymore. Like the cancel machine is worn out.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that will end, because somehow we have to get back to like an Overton window that makes some sense here.
Yeah, but it was interesting because this like movie is critical of the conspiracy theorists while there's this whole conspiracy unfolding around.
Right.
So it's like my feeble mind does not understand this movie, but anyway.
Well, let me get your feeble mind understanding like your kids need to have the right to vote.
Kids are selfish.
That's fine. They need to right the vote. All right, here's the logic. So I've always been interested in this idea that the right to vote used to be limited. And it used to be limited to stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a good argument to not do that, because those stakeholders tend to be wealthy. They tend to be of a certain in class. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they're the people who like really want, in a good way, they either want the good of your nation or they just want the good of their class, and that's who you let vote. So when you expand the right to vote to minorities, to women, to whatever, now they're maybe immigrants, right? You're basically like giving to non-landowners, you're giving a broader franchise, and we've always given a broader franchise. We've never we've never taken away votes, right? We've always given more, never taken away. And I started thinking like, my kids have more a stake in the future than any 50-year-old, and we're voting on the future, right? My kids deserve to have their voice heard or deserve some representation here. And maybe as a parent, I should be able to vote for them, right? And the person in the most stake of the future is a child, not an old person, and certainly not someone without kids. And right now we have someone running for president who does not have kids, right? And they have the least stake in the future. Okay, so I do think parents should be voting more or have more say in the future because of their kids. I also have a really weird idea about the tax code that's also radical. Why do we even have child tax deductions? Why isn't it just, if your family earns $100K and you have 6 kids, why isn't that just 8 people earning $100K and basically they're all living below the poverty line? Isn't that weird? Like, why do we say, oh, are you going to file jointly or singly with your spouse? Why don't you just say you're filing jointly with all your kids, and we're just going to take whatever income this family has and pretend, divide it by the number of people, and tax it like that,
Well, there is an economy of scale, but
Yeah, there is, but everyone in the family is sacrificing in accord with that. I mean, a lot of people aren't willing to sacrifice for kids anymore, right? Yeah. So it's like, well, we are willing to sacrifice for kids, and we are living a little bit poor because of that. Yeah. It's harder every time we have to go on vacation. It's harder every time when we get up in the morning. Yeah. We should just be considered poorer than you, And it shouldn't be a child tax deduction. It should just be divide out us into the lower tax bracket because we're just dividing that money over more people.
Well, people would say you chose to have those kids.
That's fine. You choose whether or not to file jointly or singly or get married or not get married. All of it's choice, Yeah. But it's like, if you're going to tax per person, let's treat these kids as people.
Yeah.
And if you're going to vote per person, let's treat these kids as people because, in fact, they have a greater stake in this enterprise than any of us do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a thing that is funny to me about, people that don't want kids at restaurants or airplanes or whatever. I'm like, how are we allowed to have like something against like a whole group of society? Like, and why can't I choose that I don't want to fly with assholes? Like, why can't I choose that if you can choose to fly without kids? But
can you do that? Is that actually a thing now? Or
people want that. Like, people think kids don't belong on airplanes and say it openly, but
I'm kind of okay with that.
What? How?
I just think you're right. I just think like you get all types of discrimination if you're allowed to discriminate on kids. Like we could have the all Christian airline.
Oh, sorry. I didn't understand what you were saying, but
yeah, no, I kind of agree with you. It's like, if they want to discriminate on age, let's also discriminate on everything.
Yeah.
I
just want to discriminate on are you a jerk or not, but
I know that's a real hard proxy though. Maybe you have to do a personality test that Laura authors before you get on the plane.
Yes.
Laura, you should found the airline.
Yeah, very good.
Only introverts fly on this airline. It's very peaceful.
No, I like talking to people on airplanes sometimes.
Yeah. All right. That's the case for why the children should vote. Are you for it, Laura?
Well, when you said this, I was like, no, I feel like children naturally are, tend to view things for a more self-centered scope, and it's like you're trying to bring your child out of that when you are raising your child and learn, teach your child to be a part of society. So that was my initial thing. But I think in your argument, maybe that selfishness is not so bad because you're saying everybody needs to be represented by the vote.
Well, I'm actually saying the stakeholder logic would mean kids do vote because they have a bigger stake. They should vote twice. Yeah, I'm beyond just them giving them the right to vote. Give them 2 votes. Okay. Like if you're going to live, like if the life expectancy is like 75 or whatever, and you're 25, you should have 3 more votes than a 75-year-old.
All right.
Or my 5-year-old should have that many more votes because he's got that many more years of stake in the system. All right.
Great.
Well, so to add this, so you just understand why everyone hates us and all the radical views of the Simpleton Podcast, we've now come out for betrothing your kids, saving up a dowry instead of paying for college, giving kids the right to vote, and taxing people individually, and you divide your income over your kids when you go to pay taxes. Those are all official positions of the Simpleton Podcast.
Oh, good to know.
Just kidding. And that's why we're well hated. That's why we are the most radical podcast in eternity. All right. Good to see you, Laura.
I'm making a child suffer in the background here. So
okay, make that child
good to see you, Clark.
Okay. All right. Editors, we love you. Sorry for all this work we give you.
Yes.
Later.
All right. Bye.